What is going on, golf fans? It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting live stream for this week's Cognizant Classic. Going to go through any of your questions down there in the live chat, as well as a look at the weather report, some ownership out there before lock, some lineup construction, some prop stuff on underdog and prize picks. Going to put everything together to get you ready for your exposure. So any of those questions, feel free to go ahead and fire on the live chat. But wherever you are, I hope you're having a fantastic Wednesday. We're as fired up as I am to go out there and get after this week. I'll be there the entire time, planning on being there at about 7 a.m. tomorrow morning. So if you're going to be there for any of the 4 rounds, come say hi. I'll buy you guys a beer out there, and we'll have ourselves a time out there on the golf course. So see, we've got Travis down there, Steven down there as well. We'll talking about any questions out here in just a little bit, but welcome on in. And yeah, enjoy my crazy week out there. It's going to be one for the books, and wouldn't have it any other way. What's going on, Brant? Welcome on in as well. And local Luke in the chat. That is right. And appreciate you, Primo, in down there in the live chat. Let's get after it for this week. So in terms of the course today, I'll mention some of what I noticed out there, but really it's exactly what we had for last year. Last year, we had a lot of rain during the week, which made the golf course extremely receptive, even some lift clean in place that we had out there during play. And outside of one round over there in 2024, we had calm conditions as well. And when we take a look at the forecast over there for Thursday, Friday, it looks like we're going to get sub 10 miles an hour of sustained wind out there for both days, which this time of year in Florida is extremely calm, not really what we're used to. And last year is what led to a -17 winner. So when you look at Austin Eckert making all those birdies, heck, even the other guys in the top 5 are getting to like -13, -14 or better. Sometimes score like -5 or -6 wins around this golf course. It's not going to be that way this time around. And part of that is because it is a par 71 now, as opposed to the par 70 in the past, right? That's 4 shots right there that you have in this different kind of format, but also the receptiveness of this golf course and the lack of wind can lead to some pretty low scoring. So we knew that on Monday. We kind of expected that sort of golf course. It's not all that much that changes there. A few things worth noting: the rough is a little bit longer than what you had for 2024. Not a lot of rain that you had towards the beginning of last year, so it looks a little bit healthier this time around. Greens were extremely soft. That is not atypical though, and was very much what I was expecting to see out there. You have the internal OB down hole number 10. That's the exact same as last year, and an internal OB on hole number 4 to the left, which I don't think was there in 2024. But you know, those small little changes, they're not going to impact too many players unless you're absolutely shanking it on one of those 2 holes. So the golf course setup should be pretty much spot in line with what you had last year. And if we take a look at some of the averages from this golf course, you know, if we take a look at the 3-year averages, they're not going to give us that much, because the 2 years prior to last year, you had it as a par 70, which is going to give you all sorts of wonky data when it comes to your birdies and bogeys per round. But if we just click last year, so we just take a look at it as a par 71, you'll see much more reliable data. So the birdie average spikes up when you go out there and do so. Bogey average goes down a little bit. And this sort of data from last year is going to be, I would argue, very consistent out there from year to year. So this kind of leaderboard should be to expected again. But even with that, guys like Shane Lowry, who are horse courses, showed up towards the top. Guys like Cam Young, he's had a pretty good track record around this course, right? He showed up out there year to year. And you even had your Keith Mitchells, who has an elite tier course history around here. A few other guys that show up a lot around the Cognizant Classic show up in this kind of format as well. So I don't know if we want to be adjusting our modeling all that much, but what I've done is I've decreased the importance of around the green a little bit. I think you're going to see these guys hit quite a few greens out there, and I'm looking at a lot of birdie or better percentage. Usually not something I'm incorporating into my models this week, but to get to something like 15, hell, if it's calm all 4 days, I could see it getting to something like 20 under par for the winning score. You've got to have some birdie or better firepower to get to that sort of score. You've got to avoid the big numbers, all the water around the bear trap and all that, but you're also going to have to make a lot of birdies to get to something like -20s. And considering the weather that we have for the next few days, I think that's the kind of golf course that we're going to get. So this is the HRRR forecast over there for tomorrow. You'll see in the morning that there's next to no wind in the forecast. And while it does kick up a little bit towards midday and into the afternoon, you're not talking about anything that's significant. It goes from like 3-4 miles an hour in the morning to closer to 7 to 9, 10 in the afternoon. The wind gusts do get a little bit more substantial as well. They go from that 5 to 7 mile an hour range to closer to 11 to 13 in the afternoon. So I think from a showdown perspective, you do want to be targeting some of those morning players. but the -1 scoring average from last year might even be a little bit lower here in 2025. Something like -1.5 under par wouldn't completely blow my mind from these course conditions. So just to be complete about this, let's go over here to Friday as well. And I want to bring it up both with all the different models here to see if there's any sort of split between AM and PM. And what you'll see on most of these over here for Thursday is that if there's any sort of bias, it is with higher winds in the afternoon. But you can see on a lot of these that it's relatively consistent throughout the day. Like this NEM model looks completely flat. Medio Blue, you've got 0 to 1 miles an hour the entire time. Icon looks flat. Same thing with these top two as well. And when you go over here to Friday, it's much of the same. These other models, with the exception of HRRR, are almost always completely flat, which I've got to say as a local, I've got to put a little bit of doubt on. I'm a little bit skeptical of these kind of forecasts because like clockwork, the wind usually kicks up about midday. But if it's going to be flat out there on Thursday and on Friday, there's not going to be much of a weather edge to lean into. And if we go down here to this bottom one with the HRRR, they are calling for a little bit more significant wind in the morning. But the PM, the GFS, is being used for the PM there, and it hasn't completely loaded in the HRRR. So we have no idea what they're thinking for Friday on this HRRR model. But based on the fact that around noon, it actually gets a little bit worse over there on the HRRR, the PM wave might even have more wind than what you have here in the morning. So at least as of this very second, which again is late there over there on a Wednesday evening, it doesn't look like there's any sort of definitive weather edge to go with. But tomorrow morning before lock, if you're going to wake up early like me, I'm doing it because I got to get up there to Palm Beach Gardens to go out there and watch this golf tomorrow morning. But I'm going to be checking this forecast, right? I'm going to be doing my due diligence out there because if for some reason on Friday, let's say it's more of a windy day overall, but in the afternoon, they're calling for it to gust to like 20, 25 miles an hour. Well, I'll tell you, the difference between 10 mile an hour, 15 mile an hour wind gust, and then 15 to 25 mile an hour wind gust is massive around a course with all this water. And while the scoring average might be low, you might see some low scores like you had in 2024. If the wind kicks up at any point, it'll play over par. And just to give you guys the data on that, let me actually bring up Data Golf real quick, who, they show a lot of this round by round, which is, one of the few nice things I guess I can say about Data Golf. I'm partial to bet the number as they're the sponsor of this live stream and these videos. But if we go over here to last year's scoring averages, it was under par for 3 of the 4 rounds. But look at this, round 2, it played a .33 over par. Coincidentally, that's when the wind kicked up and was a lot more of a factor. So if there's ever going to be a window of tee time, 6 hours over the first few days, where you're going to get those higher wind gusts, you want to avoid that at all costs. Now, if we go over here to the HRRR just to show you what they're looking at over there on Friday, you can see in the morning they are calling for a little bit more substantial wind, but we have no idea what the last 4 or 5 hours hold. So as of now, I'm going to go with the consensus, what we have over there in those 4 other models, which look extremely flat over there from day to day. So no real weather edge, and I'm playing in my 150 max. But if you are a 150 maxer, you could consider going out there and stacking either wave, as weather advantages, when they come about down here in Florida, tend to be pretty significant advantages. It's not like what you have with, a West Coast swing where the weather doesn't tend to be as extreme. There's been a few exceptions to that over the last year or so over there on the West Coast swing, but typically some pretty moderate weather that we have that time of year. Over here on the Florida swing, it's the exact opposite. We have very volatile weather. A lot of times it'll be beautiful in the morning, that all of a sudden it'll just open up in the afternoon. That's kind of what happened last year, and it can lead to a pretty significant edge when it comes to the showdown as well. Whether it's for showdown or over there for your main slate lineups, the weather is going to be something that you guys want to monitor this week. So that's all I've got from the weather perspective. Let me bring up my DFS projections now. And now we're going to talk through any player questions that you guys have down there in the chat, as well as some strategy when it comes to ownership. So from 8K plus, we're going to have all the projected ownership on there. That's what you have over there on the F column, all those projected ownerships for large field GPPs. It'll give us a way to talk through some of the strategy towards the top end of the board, give you guys an idea of where a lot of the field is coming in, which doesn't mean that you have to fade these guys. If there's a spot to go out there and play some chalk, it is towards the top end of the board, but I am going to lay out the slate for you guys, or give you an idea of where everyone's playing so that you can adjust accordingly. So let me catch up on chat, see where we left off. And as I mentioned, any specific player deep dives, go ahead and let me know. So where we leave off, a lot of comments, which I love. This is a great week for me. I like to see that you guys are excited about it as well. We got Zach down there, Ross as well with the the comment about the boots on the ground. I like being that for you guys, right? When I can do it, I absolutely will. And for the Florida swing, it's pretty easy to do. Would I be surprised to see a winning score at -20? A lot of that depends on the weather, but if it's calm all 4 days, I wouldn't be surprised at all. Now, Florida weather tends to be volatile. I'd expect there to be some wind at some point. So I'd say -15, -16 is where I'd put it, but it's within the range of outcomes for sure. What's going on? Wins a lot. Welcome on in. Let's have a week. What's going on, Anthony? Thoughts on CT Pan and Ryan Gerard? So I'd say I've heard Gerard a lot. I have a feeling that he's going to get some late steam, might be a little bit more popular than what you're thinking. CT Pan, not so much. So, Pan and large field GPPs, I think, has some upside. You play him at positional courses where it's not about that off the tee distance. And this is one of those kind of tracks. It's a shorter, more of a layup course off the tee than anything. And it's about the iron play. And CT Pan's been a good iron player for quite some time. So I've got to say, out of those two, I prefer Pan over Gerard. I'm not massive on either one. Full transparency, I'm not playing either one this week, but Gerard and his ownership does worry me quite a bit. If I was playing round one showdown, I'd be going all AM, Nick. So I won't be doing any myself. So just, again, transparency's sake, I don't want to tell you guys that, I'm going out there and only playing AM lineups. I'm not playing any showdown, but if I was, I would be taking that kind of stance. So Brian Harman has a wide range of results at this course from what you saw. That's pretty much everyone, though, Steven. So the one thing about Course History Week is that I'm de-emphasizing it. I don't take it as seriously. You've seen that at this golf course in general. If you take a look at the correlation to success with course history, this golf course ranks at the bare bottom. I mean, Austin Eckroat, the year before he won, his first ever start, missed the cut. Second ever start, goes out there and wins. Guys like Sepp Straka win this tournament and they go out there and miss the cut the next year. That's kind of the case with everyone. So, with Brian Harman, that doesn't surprise me all that much. And I'm more so worried about the course fit. So your final little comment there seems like his kind of course. I worry about that a whole lot more than when it comes to the course history. So if you're a good course fit, but you don't have the results to bear it, this is the kind of week where I'll take a shot on that kind of player. Best guy that I saw on the course today besides Spieth. Yeah, Spieth looked pretty good, by the way. That's one thing I did mention over there on the Twitter/X. The best player I saw was Ricky Castillo because his irons make a different sound when it comes off the club place. He's an absolute stud. He was hitting 6 irons that had maybe a 5-6 yard draw on it. I'm really looking forward to seeing how he plays. How much importance would I put on driving accuracy? Quite a bit, John. So it's already a course where you want to avoid some of that trouble. But with the rough being a little bit thicker than last year, I think it's going to come into play. Last year, you could miss because it was only about 2.25 inches. It's closer to 2.5, 2.75 inches this year. So it'll matter for sure. It mattered last year, but I think even more this time around. What's going on, Dave? Says Luke. What's going on, Dave, down there in chat? How firm are the fairways and greens? Not firm at all. So you may have missed my comments towards the beginning, but it is a soupy wet golf course. We had a bunch of rain that we got on Monday, a little bit over there on Tuesday. And even when I was out there on the golf course, we had a little drizzle coming down. Now, it wasn't anything significant, but that kind of moisture in the air is going to keep these greens real soft. Made One Live, welcome on in, Michael. Yeah, I see you commenting all the time. So I know you're one of the better community members that we have down there, catching all the content. And I appreciate having you down there live. And of course, with bringing you that content. What's going on, Jake? Thoughts on Rosner and Clanton for the week? So I bet Clanton. So I'm a big fan of Luke Clanton. And then Rosner, I believe, is somebody we're going to talk about here in a bit. And if we're not going to talk about him together, let me find him here on the sheet. I think he's a decent play. He plays well at the European-style golf courses. And look at that. Yeah, we actually are going to talk about him here a little bit later. But I bet him for a top 10 at plus 1,300. So my general thoughts on those two are that I think that they're really good plays. There's a reason why they made it to my betting card. But I'll give you some more thoughts a little bit later when we get to those specific players. Willett or Gordon as your last man in? I'd go Willett, but I've got to say I'm not the biggest fan of either one. But you maybe choose between the two. Willett, he's a grinder, so that's why I went that direction. Who wins between Straka or Henley? You have a good time out there. Absolutely will. And I like both of those, but I'm partial to Sepp Straka. I bet Straka for an outright this week. He's won here before. He won a few weeks ago for us over there at the Amex, and he's got some good form. Any thoughts on Toasty? Ooh, not the best course fit, Primo. More of the kind of guy you play at courses where you can spray it off the tee. This, unfortunately, isn't one of those weeks, and it's unfortunate because I love Toasty. I love playing him a lot more than most people. Is Danny Berger really going to be the donkey chalk? Yeah, we're about to go through ownership. It kind of looks like it. So to go back towards the top, I've got him at about 25%. unfortunately, Ross. And, I'm a big Daniel Berger guy, so I hate to see it. Of course, Anthony says, any love for Vegas or Sig? Sig, yes, this is his style golf course. You play him at shorter tracks where it's not about the distance. Iron play has been on point as well. So I kind of like Sig this week. Vegas didn't really catch my radar, but who knows, right? What's going on, Jackson? Hey, random, but any thoughts on Sig? So yeah, Marino just asked about him. I love him this week. Preferred lies? I would doubt it, Nick. Going back to the comment we had about like the firmness, you were getting no rollout off the tee. So I think there's a chance that there's preferred lies just because when you're not getting that rollout, it feels like there's going to be some mud on the golf ball. So I wouldn't roll out preferred lies, but it wasn't that bad. Like there's no puddling whatsoever. Like the golf course is in perfect shape. It's just that I think they're going to tear the sod off of it with the scoring because of how soft those greens are. Can I tell you about Isaiah Salinda? So I played him last week, John. He's an extremely long player off the tee, high ball speed, but like Toasty tends to spray it a little bit. So he's not my favorite player to get to just because he's not the best course fit. I like to take him at courses where it's pound driver, bomb and gouge, that sort of strategy. This week, it's about not having the big numbers, not hitting the ball 20, 30 yards off the fairway, because if you do that, you're taking a penalty at this course. So he's a real talented kid, came up from the Corn Ferry Tour. You're going to see him quite a bit, but probably not the best golf course for him. By the way, guys, I see 97 of you over there in the live chat. If you haven't already smashed that like button, go ahead and do so. I can't see the live counter. I honestly don't care about it all that much, but I'm imagining a lot of you need to hit that like button. So go ahead and do so if you haven't already. Fowler versus Højgaard in the head-to-head tournament. Ooh, so I'd go Højgaard there. Form favors that side, and it's not particularly close. Fowler has had a few sneaky good starts around this golf course, but Højgaard, at least right now, is the better player between those two. So I would side towards Højgaard, but you can't roll out Ricky Fowler. This is, like I said, a course where he's found some magic. What's going on, John? Another year of you asking for some one-and-done advice, debating between Straka, Denny, Minwoo, and Berger. I'd go Straka. I've got a weird feeling that some people are jumping off the Straka chain too early. I mean, you're talking about a course he's won just a little bit over a month ago. I think he's a great pick this week. What's going on, Bart? You always love playing Eric Cole. You see I have him as a play. You think he's got pretty bad form? You'd be right about that. You're guessing that I think the golf course changes it? Yes, that's exactly correct. You're not always going to be able to take guys that are all in form. If you do so, you're just going to be too chalky, especially out there in large field GPPs. And that's where a lot of my exposure goes out there in DFS. So I've got to find guys that are diamonds in the rough that aren't as good in form. And he'd be a perfect example of that. He had the second place finish here a few years ago. And the iron play hasn't been as bad as what a lot of people would think. So yeah, that's the reasoning for that. Thoughts on Clanton given his course history? He has zero course history to Peach. He has played some rounds around here. I've played one of those rounds around PGA National with the Clanton, but I think he's a stud. I bet him outright this week, but it's not because of his course history, right? He has none in tournament play. He can play here all he wants for fun, but it's a lot different. And I think he'd say that too. Let's talk about some ownership towards the top. So if you have any of those questions, we'll get back to those after we go through some game theory and a few diamonds in the rough that I want to point out for you guys. But the ownership towards the top end of the board is an interesting one because this golf course is infamous for low 6 of 6 rates. If you haven't heard it from Tout this week, you probably haven't listened to any sort of DFS advice because everyone talks about that, right? Like this is the course where the chalk goes to die. You probably even heard that from a few people this week, but it's true. This is a golf course with a ton of variance. And it's not just because, it's got this aura around it, right? People can't see him to get a 6 of 6 here. It's the golf course itself. You've got water and play on 15 of the 18 holes. And it's not like you have at some courses where it's in play on 15 of the 18 holes. It is in your face in play on 15 of the 18 holes. I think the back nine, it's on play on almost every single hole that you have. The front nine is pretty daunting as well. So towards the top here, you're going to get some guys that are 20% plus owned that miss the cut. So the reason why I say the ownership is so interesting is that some of these guys that are 25% plus owned, you almost just cross off by default. Now, I'll say that of these guys, I've got a 20% plus ownership. So of these 5 players that I have highlighted there that I'm playing, let's see, I'm playing 4 of those 5 players. So I guess it's maybe not the best example. So I'm still using quite a few of them, but you can't use all of them out there in your lineups. Now, the reason, and I'll just say it, the one I'm not using is Shane Lowry. So I'll probably go out there and win this golf tournament. But guys like a Russell Henley, a Berger, a Sanjay, a Straka, unless you love the course fit, you think that they're in form, you really like them at this sort of event, cross them off. If you have any doubt whatsoever, cross them off your list. Now, I personally don't. I really like some of these guys towards the top. I'm telling you, I'm playing the 4 guys that are outside of Shane Lowry there. However, if you really have any sort of reasoning against them, and it could be anything, it could be, I think Russell Henley's iron form lately isn't there. It could be, Daniel Berger is just too expensive. Like, whatever the case may be, cross them out of your player pool would be my advice, because the game theory at this golf tournament is how you go out there and create an edge. Now, personally, I'm choosing to do so in the bottom tier ranges, even the middle tier, going out there and trying to find some leverage pieces. But up top, it could be a way to go out there and do so as well. And maybe if you like some guys that are more popular down that 7 to 8K range, avoiding some of the chalk up here towards the top could be a way to give you that leeway to get to those more popular players. So I just want to point out some of the ownership up here because it is extremely inflated. And what I'll point out as well is that it's pretty spread out. Like, even a Pendrith that isn't as popular, not a good course fit, as a lot of people would say. And I'll put that in quotes because I think he's a better course fit and a lot of people would give him credit for. But towards the top here, even a guy like him's nearly 20%. Like, Sanjay's getting some ownership because he's far too cheap. Daniel Berger's got the elite tier course history. Same thing with a guy like a Shane Lowry here. And they're all in that same bucket of ownership. So, your guys up here, you want to go out there and flag plant them. Play them at least 40%, I'd say, over there in your exposure. Ideally, probably trying to get closer to 50% over there in your exposure, just so you can try and get closer to that 2x leverage. But up top, you shouldn't be playing everyone and using them in 30% of lineups, because what you're going to get this week is a ton of variance. You're going to get some of those guys that missed the cut, and you're going to be going down the ship with like 35% of the field. It's really tough to get 6 of 6s here. You're probably going to have one of these spend ups that you play that goes out there and misses the cut. It's trying to limit them if at all possible. So that's why up top, I'm choosing to be a little bit tighter with my exposure, because there are a few guys up here that I think just are a match made in heaven for this golf course. Like a Russell Henley. I mean, you guys know the ones I'm playing up here. Like a Henley, love his driving accuracy. A Berger, you've seen the success. He's also a really accurate driver, so I like that quite a bit. Sunjam's won here before, and for whatever reason, he's not chalked despite only being $9,800. So that's why I'm going out there and playing Sanjay. Like, if you have a reasoning to getting to these guys, just make them a conviction play. Get them in 40-50% of your lineups. And the guys that you're not playing, my advice would be to go out there and take a 0% stance. Go all in or go all off of these guys up here and embrace some of that volatility that we have. Outside of the top end of the 9K range and those 10K players, the ownership starts to spread out a little bit more. You have guys like Benny Ann, who I've got at sub 10%. You've also got Jordan Spieth, I've got it 9.7%. And you've also got some guys that have got inflated ownership. So, like, for example, Denny, I've got it nearly a little bit over 17%, actually. Ben Griffin, who I still think is a pretty good play, is closer to 15% ownership. And this is where you can really start to make those ownership decisions. And why up top, I'm eating some of that chalk this week, and where I'm really starting to implement that game theory edge is down here in this portion of the board, and even more so down there in that 6 and 7K range, where the ownership starts to spread out even more. Now, down here in this 8, 9K range, a lot of the guys I talked about as core plays would have been some chalk. So, for example, like a Ben Griffin there, but Jordan Spieth, I'm using in GPP lineups to offset some of that ownership. He's sub 10%. You can argue that he's the best player in the field when it comes to talent level, and he's sub 10% owned. Like, there are guys that you can get to, like a Michael Kim, for example. I've got it sub 12%. Terrible course history. I've heard a few people say that as a reasoning of not playing a Michael Kim this week, or even trying to pick on him for matchups. But remember, course history, very variant here. It's chaotic. Around a PGA National, it really doesn't mean all that much. So there are guys in this range that you can throw into laps. A Benny Ann, too, I'm playing him over there at $9,000. By the way, a lot of people don't know this. He has 2 top 5s around PGA National. Now, they were over 5 years ago. That's why a lot of people aren't looking at that kind of data. But you're talking about a course horse, a guy who's played very well here before, who's sub 10% owned. So if you're using a more popular Lowry, a Berger up here in that 10K range, consider getting to one of these lower owned guys down here to offset some of that ownership towards the top. Worth noting that there are a few other outrights on here that you guys probably didn't see if you guys were looking at my DFS preview earlier. One would be a Michael Kim. You can see here at 50-1. I added him to my outright card, so you could probably guess whether he's in my player pool or not. I also added an outright on JJ Spawn, and I know I don't have him down here as a yes, but yes, I'm also playing him in DFS. Really good course fit, also hitting his irons well. That was kind of the idea out there with Spawn. And some of these guys, like especially like a Michael Kim, aren't getting all that kind of ownership. So if you're going to start to make some of those game theory decisions, try and get leverage to the rest of the field, this is where I'm personally choosing to do so. Now, if you're going to fade like the whole 10K range, like fade like all the guys from Sanjay up, like that'd be another way to do it, be an even bigger stand out there against the field. But then you're also sweating the 4 best players in the field to crack an optimal lineup, which is a scary thing to go out there and do, which is just something I won't do, right? I'd rather take, the chances at fading some of the slappies down the bottom end of the board rather than some of the better players that you have in the field. So that's the ownership towards the top end of things. As I just mentioned, though, that's 6-7K range, which will unfortunately have to be censored. I've got a Patreon page, right? I've got to keep it over there for the guys behind the paywall. But ownership here is even more so important, I'd argue, because at a golf course like this that has all that kind of variance, no one should be 2-3 times higher owned than the guys around him. And because it's the 7K range and you have so many players to choose from, we've got guys down here that are 1% to 2% owned. And a lot of those 1% to 2%ers are sitting next to guys that are closer to 7 to 10% ownership. So unless they were a player on Monday that I bet outright, that I was looking for a bet, like Luke Clanton, for example, at $7,700, like he's a flag plant that I'll still play despite him being over 10% ownership. But if it's not somebody like a Clanton, who I think is an absolute stud, I have the personal connection to, I've played this golf course before with them, I'm not going to use them at over 10% ownership. So this is where you really want to start to incorporate that game theory edge, and where you can start to generate some long-term ROI. Now, a few diamonds in the rough I want to point out. So first one's going to be Seamus Power here at $7,300. Really good iron play lately. Also good at these shorter, more positional golf courses. Some Classic comes to mind out there for him. Also a Sony Open where he's had a lot of success. Are comps that I have for this sort of golf course. So I took the top 10 at plus 650. He is 5.9% owned. So I wouldn't call him a pivot in this range. In fact, he's average to maybe even slightly above average ownership, but he's far from chalk at just under 6% as well. So large field GPPs does give you an opportunity to play him in maybe 12, 15% of lineups and get that leverage, and has the kind of course fit that I'm looking for in players this week. I already mentioned the Eric Cole one. If you guys saw my DFS preview, you guys might know my thoughts there, but I also added a top 10 at plus 850 out there for Eric Cole. Grayson Sig will be the next diamond of the rough I want to point out. I know we also had questions about him, but I bet him for a top 10 at plus 900, and he's only 3.8% owned. So I've got him as about average ownership, I'd say, in this sort of range, and he's number 7 in the field when it comes to recent form ranking. So just not getting far enough attention. If he was 10, 15% owned, I probably don't play a Grayson Sig this week, but luckily not getting that sort of steam. Joel Damon also really grading out well. In fact, he's my number 7 ranked play in the field when it comes to total model ranking, and I snagged him at 150 to 1 to win. Now, on some books, he's less than 100 to win now to go out there and win. He's like 80, 90 to 1 out there in a lot of those books. So crazy CLV we got out there on Joel Damon. But you play him at courses where you don't have to hit it a mile off the tee. Check around a PGA National, and he's also in good iron form. So I really like the way that he's trending. I'm thinking about adding a top 10 bet on him as well, by the way. Don't have one in right now, but it is something that I'm considering adding myself. And Andrew Putnam here at $6,900. I also bet him for a top 10, this time at plus 1,200. His iron form is something that I just can't ignore, gaining a little bit over a half a stroke per round over his last 12 rounds. And he's 4.5% owned, which for a 6K range player is a little bit over the average, but he's also far from mega chalk out here in this range. And Antoine Rosner, we had the question about him, another player that the iron play has been stellar for. Top 10 model ranking for a 6K range player is just an absolute steal, right? And it's not like he's going to be chalky either. Ricky Castillo, I know we had the question about the player that I saw that was hitting the ball the best. That was Ricky Castillo, and I was already on the top 10 bet before I saw him play today. So I took that top 10 at plus 1,400 on Monday, and I've only got him at 1.4% ownership. So let's see, one more would be a Henrik Norlander down here at $6,500. Top 10 there at plus 1,600. And what you're noticing about these plays is like some of them have some ownership, but you're not going to see me playing the guys that are 5% owned down here in the 6K range. You're not going to see me playing the guys that are 10, 15% owned over there in the 7K range, unless they're an outright bet for me, like a Luke Clanton. So that ownership, that game theory is really of importance down here. And these guys that are sub 5% owned, they're going to give you all that leverage that you're hoping for. And if you're doing a spend up with like a Russell Henley, which by the way, that's why I've got him a little bit lower owned than some of these other guys up top. Like I've got him at closer to 24% as opposed to 25, 26%, like a lot of the other guys around him, because of the price tag. He's a little bit more expensive. It's more comfortable to be a little bit more conservative with your salary. Like heck, starting with Daniel Berger at $9,900 is about as safe as you can get with that starting salary. So that's why I think people would rather go that direction. But what you have to notice about Henley is that you are getting slightly lower ownership, but also it gives you the ability to play a 6K range player, which I know sounds crazy, the ability, right, to spend down and have to take a cheaper player, but it does give us access to these sub 5%ers. Like even the guys getting steam here, like Andrew Putnam's not being completely overlooked, right? Same thing with guys here like a Rosner, Castillo, but they're at most like 4 or 5% owned. So they're going to be able to offset a lot of that chalk towards the top. So that's a part of the other reason I like starting lineups with a guy like Russell Henley and then going to a Straka as my second man in and being a little bit aggressive with that salary. It puts you into a slightly different roster construction from what a lot of the rest of the field is going to be doing, and could help you get a little bit different to the rest of the field. Let's catch up on chat. Then we're going to talk through some lineup construction together. So if you have any player pool questions, get them in chat right now because we're going to start talking about putting together lineups here in a second. Shout out to DGen, as Steven said there. He's not up to the emergency stream tonight. Damn, I didn't know that, Steven. But yeah, like you said, thoughts out to him. I didn't know that. Be saying an extra prayer or two for him after we get off the live stream here. Hermit says, is Joel Damon worth $7,000? I'd say so. Yeah, I've been them outright this week. So yeah, you probably know my take on that kind of question. I'd say the form would warrant that. Like this is a weak tier field. This isn't a major championship where he's like $7,000. If we're at like the US Open and it's a $7,000 Joel Damon, it's a completely different answer. But yeah, Cognizant Classic, he probably is. What's going on, B Hayes? Welcome on in. What is my favorite play below $7,500? And I will definitely enjoy the tournament. And if I had to give you one, that's tough, man. I don't have a lot like any at 7,500 that I really like. I'm going to give you a couple here. Seamus, I took for the top 10, so you know he's one of my top plays. But Eric Cole at $7,200, I would say that I like him a little bit more than Seamus. I think they grade out similar. You can see projection slightly favors Seamus Power there, but Eric Cole's lower owned, right? He's almost half the ownership of what you have there with Seamus. So I might go with Eric Cole, and maybe you can spend up at another spot with that salary. Thoughts on Griot and Coles as GPP flyers? I think if you're going to use them, the GPP flyer is the right spot to do so. Neither one's form is anything that you'd feel all that confident in. I will say, though, that Ben Coles at positional golf courses is something that I can always get behind. Emiliano Grillo, he's been in much better form. I've got to say that he's a disgusting puke in your mouth sort of play out there with Emiliano. Normally he's striping his irons. Normally you go to his stat profile. It's like, oh, wow, he's gaining a little off the tee. He's never going to gain a bunch off the tee, but he'll gain like a quarter of a stroke per round and then gaining like half a stroke to a stroke per round with his irons. He's not been that way lately. So that's the worry, Ryan. I'd say if you're looking for a flyer play, though, there's crazier stuff for sure. What's going on, Zach? Last week was your first time subbing. It paid off. Got the top 10 in the giant 50-cent lottery thanks to my Celinda call. Love to hear it, Zach. Obviously, I didn't ask for the testimonial, but it's always great when it organically happens down there in chat. So you guys heard the guy. Go out there and join the Patreon page. There's a link down in the description to go out there and do so. Any thoughts on Grazerman? So I've heard the hometown narrative. A few people mentioned that he's from the area. I think he's a really good player in general. And he's a good putter, which this golf course doesn't scream putting to it. But you've seen a lot of guys with that kind of stat profile that are, more short game guys, maybe with their wedges, they tend to outshine players. It's kind of Grazerman. And what I'll say about Grazerman is that you play him when he's low owned. When he's chalk, he's like 25%. He bombs. Like you've seen him miss cuts when he's like 25% owned. He's going under the radar. I haven't really heard many people mention him as like a bet this week. Like I've heard people say like, oh, he's from the area. Maybe I'll throw him in a few DFS lineups. So I don't have him super low owned. I've got him at like 12%. But if you take a look at his track record, like his actual finishes on the PGA Tour, it's usually either missed cut. He may either just like hardly make the cut and kind of suck, or it's top 5 finish. Like when he has his best stuff, it's top 5, top 10 finish, which is absolute gold over there for DFS, which is why I think he's in play. It's why I think he's a good play actually this week. Joined late. Thoughts on Ryder? He has good course history. I don't worry about the course history that much, Robert. So, I think it's all great to have. So, Ryder, if you don't have to worry about the ownership, then I think he's a decent play this week. You go out there and roll him out. But the course history is a little bit de-emphasized here. It's a very chaotic golf course. Been a while, Luke. What's going on? Jack, thoughts on Henley, Straka, and Glover for a 3-ball parlay? So I don't know who they're going against for the 3 balls, Jack. So maybe towards the end I can bring those up. But yeah, if you're looking at the 3-ball parlays, you're also going to have to let me know the odds and that kind of stuff. But we'll circle back on that one for you. Anthony Marino says thoughts on Norgard Muller as a play. No course history. Yeah, it's his first time on the PGA Tour this year. But if the course plays easier, he's a high birdie player. In fact, he is. He's an extremely aggressive driver. I've got to say, kind of like a Toasty. There's other guys that hit the ball a long way. This is not the best course for them. There's at most 9 holes that you can hit driver on around here. There's 5 holes where you have to lay up off the tee. There's just no choice. You can't hit a driver unless you're an absolute maniac. So I don't love the course fit. It does de-emphasize his best part of his game, but he's just a better player than the price tag. What is he, like $7,300? Let's double check on the exact price tag here together. I know he's cheap. So yeah, he's $7,300. That's the reasoning for playing him, because even if he does finish in 20th, which I think would be a pretty good week for him here, if he finished in 20th, you'd feel pretty good about Muller's finish there. He may still be a top 10 fantasy scorer though, because of all those birdies he's posting. So that'd be the argument for playing him for sure. What's going on, David? Thoughts on Phillips? So yeah, super cheap play down there towards the bottom end of the pricing. He's a little bit too raw for me to have an exact opinion on him. But if you're looking for a pure flyer and you're going this far down the board, I prefer somebody like Phillips over some of these crusty veterans that we kind of know what to expect from. And I'm not going to pick on any of them in particular, but there are a ton down here that you could probably guess that I'm talking about. One with the initials RP that is kind of like the perfect example. And you guys know what I'm talking about now that I said that. But Carl, though, I'd prefer over those sort of players because he has all that potential. He has that upside. We don't really know his kind of game. We know these old cats around here, right? We know there's ceilings of a Ryan Palmer. I guess I'll just say the name, right? Well, now he'll probably win this thing now that I'm talking shit about him on stream. That's normally how it works. But I'd rather have Phillips than that sort of player, just because the unknown could be a good thing with a guy like Phillips for all we know. It could just be better than what we understand. Did I cover my day at the course earlier on stream? I did, Robert. So if you go back to the first 2-3 minutes, I did so, but I didn't notice all that much. There are a few players I walked into that I talked to Clanton today. He said he feels great, which is the biggest grin ever on his face today. So I think he's feeling good about his game. But yeah, towards the beginning, if you want the full deep dive on that. Do I think Kuchar is washed? That's not the word I'd used, Michael, because he actually had a lot better year than people would give him credit for last year. So he's older though. He's past his prime. I agree with the general sentiment there, but I wouldn't call him washed up. Zach Johnson to make the cut. Yeah, speaking of old wily veteran, he's not washed up either. He's been making some cuts. He's been posting some decent finishes. To make the cut, I don't think that's a bad bet at all. He's been good with his wedges. He's been decent from 150 yards and in. He's been hitting fairways. I've seen crazier bets, and I don't know the odds off the top of my head, but I'm assuming you're getting decent odds there. Grazerman and Clanton live less than 10 minutes away. Yeah, I knew that. I knew that with both of them, and especially Clanton. I also live less than 10 minutes away, and I'm close with them. So yeah, I knew that one. I also live less than 10 minutes away, so don't dox me. I appreciate that, Illini. Says great insights, Luke. Appreciate that. Great time out there and great time this week. Absolutely. And by the way, the live streams this week, we might be having a little bit of extra fun on, because if you guys didn't see my tweet about it, they have an open bar at the Bear Trap, and that's the hospitality I have all week. So that's going to be a fun one. Any thoughts on Celinda? Not the best course fit, Michael, but I am high on him long term. So none for me this week because of the fact that it's a golf course where you have to lay up. Phillips, you've been liking too. Yeah, dude, really high upside player. That's for damn sure, of course. How do I feel about Mr. Harry Hall? Not the best course fit. I do like him at more wide open courses. However, he's better than the price tag. I mean, we bet him a few weeks ago. He's the kind of player that I'm higher on than a lot of other people. At $7,400, I'd actually compare him kind of like to a Nicholas Norgard Muller, where if he could finish top 20, you'd feel great about that, because this isn't the kind of course, at least in my head, I could be wrong about this, of course, where these kind of guys are going to top 5 or win. They're not as accurate as a lot of your people that usually top 5 here. Like look what you've seen over the last 4 or 5 years. Now, if they have a good enough week to finish top 20, that means that they're making like 20 to 25 birdies. That's why I still think they're usable in DFS, because if they even make the cut, that might be enough right there. Play Spieth when the field is fading him. Yep, that's what I'm doing this week, Illini. He's my favorite player, and when I get to watch him in person, I don't know what it is, Illini. Nick has caught on to this. That's why Nick bet him this week. I don't know if I should be telling you guys all this. I know he bet him and he played him this week just like I did, because I think he caught on at a certain point that when I show up and I watch my guy in person, good things tend to happen. So we'll leave it there. And yeah, not a lot of people are playing him this week. So, seems like an interesting play, huh? Zach says, earlier on X, I was concerned with some of the players tinkering with their swings. Were any of them guys in my player pool? And if so, will I be adjusting it? Yeah, I've already adjusted my player pool. And I don't like to rag on any players in particular, Zach, so I'm probably going to keep those to myself. But yeah, it's incorporated into my player pool. There was no one that I was on, like for an outright or anything, that I saw anything terrible from. But if I did, I would relay that info. But yeah, definitely something I looked at. You've been so back and forth about playing Henley. Do I have any good insight onto that? I'm playing him, Jamari. So maybe that helps break your tie there. Maybe not. But he is an extremely accurate driver. That's what we're looking for in our off-the-tee players. And from 175 yards and in, that's the main proximity this week. 125 to 175 is going to be worn out like crazy. He's one of the best players in the world, let alone of what we have in this field. So from the course fit perspective, he checks that box emphatically. The quote-unquote issue, and we'll put issue in quotes, is that his form isn't as good as the other guys up top. He had a T41 last year. Oh, boo-hoo, right? He made a cut. He wasn't a nuts performance. Like people that think that that's terrible are just, their expectations are way too high. For a lot of these players, look at this T8, T3 finish back there 4 or 5 years ago. So it's not like he hasn't done here before. I mean, he just hasn't played a lot at the PGA National. And if that's going to make him slightly lower owned than some of these other guys, then yeah, I think he's a decent play. Just the course fit is fantastic. That's for damn sure. All right, let me bring up Draftkings. We're going to go through some lineup construction here. By the way, guys, I see 140 of you down there in chat. If you haven't already hit that like button, what are you jabronis waiting for? Let's get those like numbers up, and I'll pump this out there to even more people. But what we're going to do here together is we're going to build a lineup together to give you guys some insight into what I'm thinking about when I'm building my lineups. And this is more so for the large field GPP. So did I click the big sand trap? Okay, I did. So this is for the big $25 GPP. If we're going to enter a GPP lineup out here for this kind of contest, we've got to beat, 35,000 other entries. When you're entering a contest like this, and if you're not thinking about the ownership, then you're doing yourself a massive disservice. You need to be thinking about ownership. You need to be thinking about ways to go out there and beat 35,000 other entries if you want to try and take home first place. And the other reason why I say to go and take down first place is because of how top heavy the payout structure is here. You can see your top 2 finishing positions that pay 300,000 collectively is, like 35-40% of the player pool. That's all going out there to the first few spots. So if you're not playing for first and second place, then why the hell are you playing in this contest? Like genuinely, like if you're playing in this to finish in 100th out of 35,000 entries, which by the way would be really good. That'd be a top, I can't do that math in my head right here, but you'd be a top like 1-2 percentile lineup going out there and doing that sort of thing. You finish in 100th and you're going to get $150 back. That's 6 times your money, which I'd be pretty happy with a 6x ROI. But that sort of lineup, you could be taking down a lot of single entry GPPs. So the reason I point that out is if you're going to enter this sort of GPP, it can be the $5 GPP as well. Those are the contests, by the way, that I like to enter. You need to be aggressive and go balls to the wall to try and take this thing down. And the thing that makes it an even better idea to try and play against the field this week. And by playing against the field, I mean play the game theory edge. Try and take low-owned players to leverage against what the rest of the field is doing. It's an even better idea this week because it's at PGA National, a course with water in play on 15 of the 18 holes. In fact, over a 4-round sample size, players average over 2 bogeys or worse per event around this kind of golf course. 2 bogeys or worse per player at this event. I mean, that is just unheard of out here for PGA Tour stop. That's why you want to embrace that chaos. Know that there's going to be some high-owned guys that go out there and miss the cut. And that's why I really like the big $5 and $25 GPPs this week, even if they are going to be super top heavy with these payouts, because it lets you embrace the golf course and the kind of style of golf that we see here. So towards the top, you may have to take some ownership. We mentioned that with the game theory earlier, like up here, it's pretty much unavoidable to go out there and take someone with some ownership. So here we're going to throw in a Daniel Berger, second man in. We're going to go with the higher owned option. Like we could go Benny Ann to try and get a little different, but just for the sake of showing you guys the thought process of trying to compensate for some chalk, we're going to go with a little bit more ownership just to try and make our job in our life a little bit harder. So let's go with Denny McCarthy as our next man in. If we really wanted to stress ourselves, we could go with like a Straka here. In fact, we will. They're at $9,400. We've got a 25%er, a guy who's over 20% over there with a Straka. And you've only got 4 spots to get all the leverage that we need. So for our next man in, you're probably taking a low, like 8K guy with this kind of salary remaining, like maybe a mid to high range 8K guy out there in this kind of lineup. It'd be real nice to play a Ben Griffin here. And you might be able to get away with playing Ben Griffin if you take some 3 sub 5%ers with your last 3 spots here. But because we started with 2 guys that are over 20%, it's a better idea to consider guys like a Spieth or Michael Kim that are going to be closer to that 10% ownership mark. And it's not the end all be all, because it is a 10% owned guy as opposed to 15% over there with the Ben Griffin, but it does help to start to get us a little bit more different. So let's throw in a Michael Kim there. Let's do the more prudent play and take in that direction. Let's throw in a JJ Spawn here, who, by the way, JJ Spawn, not mega chalk towards the top end of the 7K range. More people getting to guys like a Glover, Clanton, heck, even a Novak, Horschel are getting some exposure. Who, by the way, I bet Novak and Horschel, so I totally understand why they're getting a little bit of steam out there. But let's go with Spawn, as he's slightly lower owned than some of those other players. And part of that is because of some of that chalk we took towards the top. Now, with our last 2 spots here, it's not like you have to take mega pivots. Like, hell, even if you really wanted Clanton in this kind of lineup, like you wanted Berger, Straka, and you wanted Clanton out there, because we didn't have Griffin before, like if we had another piece of chalk over here in the 8K range, you probably can't get away with this kind of lineup, because this kind of lineup right here has like 4 pieces of classical chalk. And hell, even JJ Spawn isn't that low owned, but because we were a little bit more cognizant about what we were doing with our ownership, now we can afford to take a Luke Clanton if we want to. And for our last man in, we've still got to think about getting different. You probably want a sub 3-4%er out here for your last man in. But if you do that sort of thing, you're going to have the leverage you need out there in those big $5 and $25 GPPs. And that's even despite playing some of the guys that are chalk this week. So, there are going to be some players out there that you want to mark out of your player pool because they're highly owned, but that doesn't mean that you have to take them out of your player pool, because as Tambo says over there with Ship It Nation, it's not who you play, it's how you play them out there in your lineup. So that's why towards the top end of the pool, I can afford to take some guys with that ownership, because I know towards the middle to bottom end of the board, I'm going to have the ability to go out there and differentiate. And I guess one thing you could have probably picked up on out there with Luke Clanton is, if I'm going to use Clanton this week, because I'm taking some of that chalk towards the top, I'm not going to be able to pair him up with like a guy like a Ben Griffin very often, because if I do so, and if I want to play a Luke Clanton here, like these two pretty chalky compared to some of the guys around him, I kind of have to force in like a Benny Ann, like rather than taking like a Denny McCarthy, even like a Keith Mitchell, who's a little bit higher owned. That's where you like have to force in one of these other sub 10% owned guys to offset some of that ownership. So it starts to get a little wonky when you get into those kind of combinations, which is why you're probably not going to see me playing these two together all that often with that chocolate I'm taking up top. So, depending on your player pool, you're going to have some weird combinations like that, some wonky ownership scenarios that you're going to want to handle out there with your exposure. I haven't built my set of 150 quite yet. I have my player pool together, actually going to do so as soon as we get off the live stream right here. But those are the kind of things that I'm going to have to go out there and figure out, like whether it's setting a rule on not having a Griffin or a Clanton together, or just going through and making sure that those lineups have enough leverage pieces in them. Like I just go through and search for that combination, and then do my due diligence by hand. Those are the kind of things you should be thinking about when you're going out there and building lineups. So that's the DraftKings side. That's it over there for the DFS side of things. Still have some underdog and prize pick stuff that we're going to go through. So let me go ahead and actually bring up prize picks right now so we can go through some of those projections. But if you're just here for DFS over there on DraftKings, I still appreciate you guys stopping by as per usual. The only thing I ask is that you smash that like button before you guys hop on out of here, and also that you subscribe so you don't miss any of the content to come. Rounds 2 through 4, Showdown will be on the Ship It Nation YouTube. That'll be just like what we've been doing all season here. And for the prop and betting stuff, it'll be on my channel directly afterwards. So same schedule as what we've had here for all of 2025. I know a lot of you guys are only here for the DFS side. So wanted to get the disclaimer out there before any of you head out of there. But like I said, the only thing I need you to do, smash that like button if you guys haven't already. But in terms of these averages, we already talked about the golf course conditions a little bit earlier. I actually don't think they're going to change very much. And I think if there's going to be any sort of variation here, it likely gets a little bit easier than what we had for last year. The reason I say that is one of the 4 rounds did play over par. And you can see if we averaged out the other 3 rounds here, that's playing closer to like 1.6, 1.7 under par. So my scoring average prediction out there for round number 1, I'm going to put it at 1.35 under par. So just a hair easier than what you had last year, about a quarter of a stroke easier, in fact, compared to last year's average. Birdie average, I think it'll stay right about that 4 mark, maybe a hair below like what we had for last year. And then your bogey average, I think that one might go down just a little bit. And the main reasoning for that being the lack of winds that we have over here at this forecast. If we go back to Thursday and this HRRR, you'll see that we have at most about 9 miles an hour sustained wind. And then in the afternoon, it does get closer to 10 to maybe 13 miles an hour wind gusts, but it's nothing that's going to blow guys off this course. So I think these averages from last year are, for the most part, pretty reliable. It's just that they could get a hair easier based, and a lot of that does come down to pins. We haven't had the liberty of taking a look at all of those quite yet, but I'm assuming it's your typical round 1 or round 2 setup here, where they're not trying to make it too difficult before you have that cut made. The reason for that, of course, is pace of play, right? You don't want to make it brutally difficult out there for Thursday or Friday when you have 144 players to try and get done throughout the day. So I think that these are going to be extremely helpful in our analysis. And yeah, let's hop over here in a second after I catch up on the chat. A little deep dive on Billy Ho. I love him this week, Joseph. So I bet him. I bet him at 55 to 1. So that tells you how much I probably like him. And really good Bermuda grass putter. His iron play has been carrying him lately, gaining about 0.7, 0.8 strokes per round with his shots gained approach. So if you like yourself a Bermuda putter, a guy that really plays well at this time of year, then play yourself some Billy O. Ann and Smalley or Rogers and Grazerman? Ooh, that's close. I'd probably go the second one, though, just because you're getting a little bit more safety, I'd say, with that second pairing. The first one, though, you got lower ownership. So if you need to differentiate yourself, maybe you go with pairing number 1. But if ownership's not a big deal, I'd probably go with pairing number 2. Cognizant, see what I did there? Yeah, a unintentional pun, I guess I threw out there. What's going on, Tim? How does an all Palm Springs County team? Oh, look, okay, that was a little bit of a tongue twister there, Tim. But I see what you're saying. You got Berger, Denny, Grazerman as the core with some of those other guys as mix-ins. Yeah, if you want to go with a narrative, I'm never against that. But I think there's some other guys you could probably add to that as well. There's some other guys from down here in Palm Beach County that you didn't have on that list. So I would say maybe you want to expand your horizons a little bit, but I see what you're doing there. You got Henley versus Spieth and Fowler. So these are the odds for the 3 balls from before. You got Straka versus Horschel and Cam, and then Glover versus Echeverria and Harmon. I've got to say that group with Glover, I kind of like that plus 160 right there. The second one, you got Cam Young. I think he's a decent fade candidate. Horschel, though, I really do like. I don't know, man. Like, those are tough groups, right? Because you're taking guys I like. Like, I for sure like Henley, Straka, Glover. I'm playing all 3 of those players, but they're matched up against guys that I like too. Like, Horschel's a tough one. Like, I could see Horschel beating Straka. I could see Spieth beating Henley. Like, Spieth, better player than Henley long term, at least in my opinion. And then Glover going against a guy like Echeverria. My favorite would be the Glover one, though. Glover plus 160. It's also the longest odds that you have of those 3. That's the one I'd lean on the most. And yeah, I'm on Spieth, but you love Henley tomorrow. Yeah, I like Henley tomorrow as well. Hell, I think he'll play well. But damn, going against my boy Jordan, it's hard for me to want to bet against him, right? I'm going to be fully transparent about it. That's for sure. All right, let's go through some prop stuff. So I already mentioned some of those averages. If you guys didn't already see my Bet the Number article, but I had some unders on strokes for these morning guys. So one of them was Jordan Spieth. The other was Luke Clanton that I took for the under on strokes. And we don't have lines for comparisons on books, but if you take a look at the guys that they have posted, you'll see that it's lower tier players than these two in terms of shots gained per round. And they're like minus 130 for the under. So for example, like Denny McCarthy is minus 140 for the under. Even guys like a Horschel are minus 120, but look at that, Sepp, minus 160 for the under. Brian Harman is even minus 120 for the under. Hell, Alex Smalley here is minus 125 for the under. So you'd have to think that a guy like Jordan for sure would carry more juice than that, even if, right, he hasn't played that much this year. He has a top 5 finish at the Waste Management out of those few different starts. And then Luke Clanton, he averages like 1.5 shots gained per round on the PGA Tour. If we're going to have the scoring average at 1, maybe 1.5 under, that's putting these kind of players at 2.5, maybe even 3 under par over there for a projection. And 3 under par, this par 71 setup would be 68 strokes, conservatively, maybe even 68.5. So I think that these are 1-stroke discrepancies, at least compared to my projections, because I have both comfortably at about a shot gain to the field. And with the morning tee time over there, I know it says 12:40. Both are going off before 7:30 local time over here. They're going to have next to no wind. They're going to have a receptive golf course to go out there and get after it. And they're better than average players out there in this kind of field. And I think there's a chance that the scoring average could be close to 69.5 tomorrow. So those were 2 no-brainer plays that I got to. I do have a few others that I've entered over there on my Patreon page, but I'm keeping it kind of light out there before lock, just so I don't overexpose myself. You know, I want to see some of the scoring averages as I'm out there on the course tomorrow before potentially adding some live ads over there in Underdog or Prize Picks. So we're going to leave it at just these 2 for the live stream, as if it gave you guys another slip here, that'd be all the exposure that I already have in for round number 1. So for the other slip I entered, you guys can check that out over there on the Patreon page. But of course, I'll be adding on top of that as well. So if you guys want to see all the other pieces of exposure I end up entering, you can catch them out over there. But just based on what I saw on the golf course today, like overs on birdies, I don't think are the worst idea, because average last year was about 4 per round, 3.94, if you want to be exact about it. And I think conditions tomorrow might even be easier than what we had on average last year. So, you know, a guy like a Højgaard, I haven't played this one. So full transparency, this is not a part of that other slip that I entered, but like I was potentially even looking at that one, a Harry Hall over potential look, like a Charlie Hoffman over at 3.5, like could be a potential look. Some of these over birdies, especially for guys that average over your field average for birdies, could be looks for sure. Like hell, even a Sanjay Yim over here, which I don't know if he has a line over here in Fanduel. Let's double check. Let's not even guess. There's minus 125. There's over there at 4.5 birdies. I'd even lean on for the over there as well. Now over here for pars or better, there was an under that I took for pars or better earlier in the week. After seeing course conditions, this is another category that I'm also going to take a wait and see approach on, because historically some unders here would make sense. But because the course looks softer, it looks maybe even easier than what you had for last year, I want to hold off on entering a lot of these until we get this kind of scoring averages. Now, if it only plays like a stroke under par, maybe it's a hair more difficult than what I was just projecting for. Some unders here could make a whole lot of sense. So I'm not going to point out that player because it is on that slip that I put there on the Patreon page. Just like the ownership guys, right? I can give you guys a little taste. I can give you guys a lot of helpful stuff over here in the live streams, but some of it I do have to keep behind the paywall as well. So I know that probably annoys some people, but I'm sure a lot of you probably understand that as well. Let's see, any prop questions? If not, we're going to hop on out of here. This is not the Lord's time zone. You tricked you. Yeah, not quite, Wayne. It's East Coast time zone over here, the best coast, as some of us call it. Any Jesper Svensson or Tom Hoge thoughts? So Svensson's got really good iron play. I didn't get to see him out there in the course. Hoge, historically really good iron play, and in those proximity buckets that we're looking for, a menace from 125 to 175. However, his form lately has been absolute shit. Like, I don't know what happened to Hoge, but his last few events, he hasn't done really anything right. But long term, he fits the style golf course. I mean, he won at Pebble Beach, which maybe isn't a perfect comp for what we have here, but it's at least close to the kind of golf course that we have this week. So I'm high on both of them you're looking for the player with form, it's Jesper. If you're looking for the guy that fits the golf course better, it's Tom Hoagie, though. So kind of different plays. And Jesper, by the way, he's the kind of guy that I like playing at longer style golf courses just because he's so long. He's a real tall guy. If you guys haven't seen him out there too. But the saving grace is because he's from the DP World Tour, very familiar, the shorter positional golf course with a bunch of water around it. That experience will be helpful around the PGA National. Like we've seen a lot of these European players play well here before because they play a lot of these kind of courses. Like if you've watched the DP World Tour, if you've tracked over there for quite some time, you look at their shot tracker, it's water on every single hole pretty much. If it's not off the tee shot, it's around the green almost every single time. Maybe not on every golf course they play, especially like when they travel out there to like the desert, but a lot of the European courses in particular. Alrighty, guys, that's all I've got for the live stream. I've got to build some lineups out here myself. And I plan on being there at 7 a.m. Eastern time. So your boy's going to have to wake up a whole lot earlier than what I'm used to. Something like 5, maybe even 5:30 to get my workout and morning coffee in me before I head up there. But I'm looking forward to all of that. Going to have those showdown streams, as I mentioned before. Also, the prop and betting live streams here afterwards over here on my channel. So subscribe so you guys don't miss any of that when it drops. Also, smash that like button if you haven't already. And hey, if you made it this far into the live stream and you haven't already smashed that like button, you're a jabroni. Go ahead and fix that before we go out there and end this thing. But that's all I've got, guys. Best of luck with all of your exposure. I hope to see you guys take down a few GPPs, go out there, cash out an outright bet or two as well. And let's have ourselves a Cognizant Classic.